So to quickly introduce myself, my name is Megan Miner, and I'm a consultant that works with the Indiana Broadband Office on all things BEAD, particularly the challenge process right now. So I will turn it over to Steve quickly to give us an introduction, and then we will jump right into the webinar.
Hey, everybody. Steve Cox here. I'm the Infrastructure and Broadband Administrator for the state. Just looking at the list of folks that are in the meeting right now, I can see we've met before with the vast majority of you. I just wanted to say a couple of quick things. Number one, I want to thank everybody for their participation in the challenge phase of the challenge process for our BEAD program. Frankly, I believe everybody in our office agrees that we've probably surpassed the number of challenges that we expected and addresses. Megan's going to go into that into a little further detail in the presentation today. And it's really, really, really important that we continue to have participation from all of you moving into the rebuttal phase of the challenge process in order for us to build out the most accurate map and address list for the BEAD program for the state of Indiana. It's incredibly important to our program. Again, I just want to thank you all ahead of time in advance for your participation and your continued participation in the program. So thank you again, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan.
All right. Thanks, Steve. So here's where we're headed today. We're going to recap some of the challenge process overall, and then particularly the challenge phase, as Steve just alluded to. And then really we'll jump into the rebuttal phase. We'll talk about the purpose of the rebuttal phase, the types of evidence that we're expecting to receive in rebuttals. We'll walk through what rebuttal submission actually looks like on the Ready platform. And then I believe we should have time for questions at the end. So if you have any of those, you can feel free to put them in chat along the way, or we may have some time to unmute at the end. So just to reiterate, first of all, our thanks for your participation in the challenge phase, and then also just to focus us all on the real purpose of the challenge process. And this extends through the challenge phase into the rebuttal phase and beyond. Really, the challenge process is the broadband office's opportunity to gather the most accurate data possible. And so that is through receiving those challenges and then also the rebuttal evidence as well. The more accurate that we can make our map and our understanding of what's going on within the state, the best we can do with that money that has been allocated to the state, and really making sure that we reach all of the locations within the state that need it. So just want to center our goals for the rebuttal phase, on this overarching, making sure we have the most accurate information possible. So looking at the timing overall for the challenge process, so we started with that challenge phase, which opened on March 4th, went through April 17th. That is now complete. We are now also wrapping up that challenge review phase. So that was the 2-week period where the Indiana Broadband Office made sure to get eyes on every single challenge submitted, and make sure that we had a minimum level of evidence for every single one of those challenges. Now we will be moving into that rebuttal phase. So just want to point out those dates that will begin at 9 a.m. on May 2nd. So you can begin submitting rebuttals on May 2nd, 9 a.m. in the Ready portal, and that will go through June 1st. Immediately after the rebuttal phase finishes, we will move into final determinations. That will effectively be the month of June. And then as we hit July 1st, that is when we will wrap up all things challenge process in terms of participation. So these are the dates that you need to remember as we move into that rebuttal phase. Again, think of that June 1st deadline. That's really what you need to have in mind. To recap quickly the challenge phase, since this obviously impacts what is going to happen in rebuttals, we did receive just over 1,000 total challenges submitted. And that included over 285,000 locations. So these are not necessarily unique locations, but of all of those challenges submitted, there were in total 285,000. We had 45 participating challengers. The breakdown we have here, so we were quite happy with our participation with various groups of those permissible challengers. We had great participation across our internet service providers, our nonprofits, and our units of local government. And then finally, I do want to also point out under those challenges submitted, we did not have every challenge type submitted during the challenge phase. So we have a list here of the type of challenge and then the number of submissions that we had under each of those. You can see availability challenges were our most common that we saw during the challenge phase. You'll see these challenge types repeated because, of course, now these are the relevant pieces that you will be able to rebut as well during the rebuttal phase. So moving into the rebuttal phase itself. So the rebuttal phase is really an opportunity for permissible challengers to review some of those locations that were challenged during the challenge phase, and ultimately submit rebuttal evidence if they think that maybe that challenge was made an error or is potentially incorrect, or if they have some more up-to-date evidence that would show basically the opposite of the challenge. So one thing I want to emphasize is that all permissible challengers can actually participate in the rebuttal phase. So this is not just internet service providers. There is still a role for those nonprofit organizations and those units of local government. You also did not have to participate in the challenge phase to be able to participate in the rebuttal phase. If you are someone that is new to this, you can still register for the Ready portal and gain access that way. So even if you did not submit any challenges, you are still welcome to submit rebuttals. Another thing that I want to clarify about the rebuttal phase, so all permissible challengers do have a role in this. However, there are certain challenges that have certain participation. So for example,
Yes.
those provider service level challenges, those are those challenges that were availability, speed,
Okay.
business service only.
Okay.
Those are going to be against a specific internet service provider at a specific location. Those can only be rebutted by the specific challenged internet service provider. The role for the other permissible challengers is going to be in those other challenge
Okay.
types. And so as we're looking at what
That
was
sounds good.
actually submitted, and sorry, I'm just going to pause. If we could just make sure everyone has their mic muted, that would be great. Thank you. So looking at those other challenges where other permissible challengers can submit rebuttal evidence, those are going to be planned and existing service challenges, enforceable commitments, and the challenges saying that a location is a community anchor institution. So I do want to talk through a bit of the challenge process flow and make sure that everyone is clear. So challenges do not have to be rebutted. If you think a challenge is correct, it can absolutely stand. So just to walk you through kind of all of the endpoints of this process specifically. So first, a challenge is submitted and reviewed. So the only challenges that will be available for rebuttal are those that were reviewed and confirmed to have a minimum level of required evidence by the IDO. So if there was a challenge submitted and it did not meet that minimum evidence threshold, you will not see that as something that is possible to rebut. So after that challenge has been submitted, let's start, I think, on the easier path here, which is if there is ultimately no rebuttal submitted against that challenge at the end of the rebuttal phase, then that challenge will automatically be sustained. It will not go to final determinations. Basically, that challenge will automatically be accepted. And then the more complicated path, just to talk through the specifications around that. If there is a rebuttal submitted with a challenge, that location will then enter what is called a disputed state, basically just saying that it has both challenge evidence and rebuttal evidence. Any location that enters a disputed state will go to the final determinations phase, which is going to be that kind of month of June timeframe. And so every single location will be reviewed during that final determinations phase. That will be a review by a committee at the Indiana Broadband Office. They will review in depth the evidence that was submitted for both the challenge and the rebuttal, and then ultimately make a determination. The two possibilities there are a challenge being sustained, effectively that challenge being accepted, or that challenge being rejected. And that would be the instance where potentially that rebuttal evidence provided some more insight about that location, in which we really should should reject that challenge. So again, just to emphasize a couple of things here, you do not have to submit rebuttals for all challenges. You can absolutely look at a challenge and think that it should be sustained, in which case you do not have to do any work. That will automatically be sustained then at the end of the rebuttal phase. And then in terms of preparing for the rebuttal phase, as it stands right now, all rebuttal phase activities will take place within the Ready portal, and permissible challengers can already review some of the challenges against them. You will not be able to submit those rebuttals until the rebuttal phase opens, at which time you will be able to see all of the challenges. When you are looking at the challenges that are available for rebuttal, you will see some limited information about each of those challenges. So you will be able to see all of the locations that are included in that challenge, including if there were some locations originally in the challenge that were rejected because they did not have sufficient evidence. So you'll be able to see the details of the locations that were accepted, as well as if there were any number that were not accepted. You'll be able to see the challenge type. You'll be able to see the entity that submitted that challenge, the provider being challenged, if applicable to that challenge type, and then the specific technology being challenged. I do want to say that permissible challengers cannot see the evidence that was submitted with a challenge during the rebuttal phase. I know that this has been a question that we've gotten very frequently. There is some reasoning behind that. Much of the evidence submitted can be confidential and include significant pieces of PII. And also, the level of evidence that is needed for a rebuttal may not really be influenced by the challenge evidence itself. So you may be submitting the same types of evidence regardless of what the challenge evidence itself was. So again, you'll be able to see that challenge type and a little bit of information to help guide, whether or not you think you should prepare a rebuttal. When you are going into the portal, which you will see kind of in the latter section of this presentation that has screenshots of how this process actually works, you will see that all rebuttals need to be submitted by how the challenge is grouped. So a permissible challenger will be able to see all of the challenges that are available to them for rebuttal, and then you would need to submit your rebuttal evidence within each of those challenges. You can rebut only certain locations from a challenge. Let's say you don't want to rebut all of them, but maybe a few of them. You can select individual locations within a challenge to rebut. And it is possible to use the same evidence. Let's say you have a really comprehensive map that may cover several challenges. You can submit that same evidence for multiple rebuttals, but you are going to have to submit that evidence, within each challenge and make sure you have all of your locations covered. Another thing that is a little bit different in the rebuttal phase. So in the challenge phase, as challenges came in, the Indiana Broadband Office did a review to make sure that we had a minimum level of evidence to move that challenge forward. That is not the process in the rebuttal phase. So rebuttal evidence will not be reviewed until the final determination phase. So that will be just kind of one comprehensive look where we're looking at both the challenge evidence and the rebuttal evidence at one time. So if you have questions about any kind of minimally acceptable evidence or whether a piece of evidence, would really show what you want to in terms of a rebuttal, please reach out to the Indiana Broadband Office. We are happy to kind of do a pre-review of your evidence just to let you know if that's minimally acceptable or talk through some examples, and that will be in the slide deck as well. Final determinations are, of course, a little bit more complicated. So even if the rebuttal evidence that is submitted is kind of minimally viable, minimally acceptable, that does not mean that that is a guarantee that the challenge will then be rejected. In final determinations, you might have both challenge evidence and rebuttal evidence that is quite strong or has good evidence. And so we will have to evaluate, and it will be on a case-by-case basis. So just want to say that there is the possibility that challenge evidence could still outweigh rebuttal evidence, and also the instance where both are good, but then the rebuttal evidence outweighs the challenge evidence. It's going to be very specific to the location and the evidence submitted. So next, I want to move into talking about some example evidence for rebuttals. I have limited this to only the types of challenges that you will see based on what we received during the challenge phase. And I will also indicate whether those are challenges, which permissible challengers we would expect would be rebutting. So the first of these are availability rebuttals. So these are provider service level challenges. So only the specific challenged provider at that location will be able to see these challenges and be able to rebut them. So essentially, if you are deciding to submit rebuttal evidence on an availability challenge, you are saying that you do actually have service at that location at or above 100/20 that can be installed within 10 days of a request and for a standard installation fee. For several of these, you will see that there is not hard and fast required evidence. There's really just a list of example evidence that could be sufficient or that you might be thinking of to really prove availability. And you'll notice that many of these are very, very similar to what you submitted during the challenge phase. So you'll expect to see a lot of overlap in the types of evidence that you'll see. So this could be a copy of the customer's bill, your website showing that service is available. Let's say you have actually sent an offer letter to a customer showing them what's available at that location. Those would all be good examples of types of evidence that you might submit for an availability rebuttal. The next is a speed challenge rebuttal. This is another provider service level challenge. So again, this is going to be only that specific challenged provider at that location can see or rebut this challenge. I will say this is one of the only rebuttals, just like in the challenge phase and with challenge evidence, that has really specific requirements about what we have to see. This is going to be, again, very similar to the challenge phase. You have to have those 3 speed tests taken on 3 different days to show above 100/20 at those locations. The next is business service only. So this would be suggesting that if you're submitting rebuttal evidence, you are saying that residential service is also available at the location. Again, you're going to see some really similar example evidence types. That's going to be really any evidence that you can show us proving that service is available at the location, marketed to consumers. That could be a screenshot of the provider website showing that residential service is available, or again, a copy of an offer letter for that particular location. So just want to pause there and say again, those are the 3 challenge types that we received that can only be rebutted by the specific provider that was challenged at that location. We're going to move on to the next 3, but these are the ones that any permissible challenger will be able to see and actually submit rebuttal evidence about. So the next is enforceable commitment. So if you are rebutting an enforceable commitment challenge, you are essentially saying that you have proof that the provider will not meet that enforceable commitment. So this could be any kind of documentation around the provider defaulting on that specific commitment, that the provider is not building out that commitment to a BEAD sufficient level or with a BEAD applicable technology, if you have proof of that, or any other documentation that the provider will not be able to meet that commitment. And again, this is a place that all permissible challengers will be able to see those challenges and submit that rebuttal evidence. The next one would be planned or existing service. This is very similar to that enforceable commitment rebuttal. This would be any kind of proof showing that they do not actually plan to serve, that they do not currently serve that location or are no longer planning to build out to that location, or that they cannot complete that deployment by that June 30th of 2024 date. So again, these would be any pieces of documentation showing that that planned or existing service will not be met. And then finally, for our final challenge type, you can also rebut a location is a community anchor institution challenge. You would be suggesting here that the location is not actually a community anchor institution, or that it was a community anchor institution that is no longer in operation. So maybe that is a website screenshot showing that that location no longer operates, or maybe a description of the organization showing that it does not actually fall within the definitions of a community anchor institution as set by the Indiana Broadband Office. So Those are some examples of rebuttal evidence that you can expect to see. Again, the Indiana Broadband Office would be happy to meet with any permissible challengers to talk through examples of evidence that you may want to submit and whether or not that would be kind of minimally sufficient for the rebuttal phase. All right, now that we've gone over some of these concepts and what the rebuttal phase looks like, I'd like to walk you through what that is going to look like in the Ready portal specifically. I will say I do think rebuttal submission is actually a little bit easier than the challenge submission within the portal since those challenges have already been set. But we will walk through exactly what that will look like on your dashboard and then moving forward. So when we are in the rebuttal submission phase, that main dashboard that you see when you log into the Ready portal is going to look a little bit different. I want to draw your attention to two things in particular. So the first, you're going to see that there are now two new tabs that say challenges received and open for rebuttal. And I want to make sure that we point out the difference between those two. So first, that challenges received tab, this is going to show for internet service providers, and those are going to be the challenges that are against that specific provider, and only the challenged provider can see those or rebut them. So if you are an internet service provider, expect to see this tab on your Ready dashboard, and that will be any challenges that have been received specifically against your service, and you'll be able to scroll through those and choose if you would like to provide rebuttal evidence for any of those. The other tab, which is open for rebuttal, those are those challenges that all challengers can see and rebut. It is possible for multiple permissible challengers to submit a rebuttal on the same challenge. That is totally okay. And you will also be able to see that ultimately on the dashboard as well. You'll be able to see if any other rebuttals have been submitted for that challenge. So those are the two locations to go to look at the challenges that are possible to rebut. When for this example, all of this is completely test data. This is not the live site. None of these are live challenges. They've just been put in here as an example for the screenshots. So in this example, we're on that open for rebuttal tab, and we see that there is one challenge that is open for rebuttal, and that is a planned service challenge. So all you will do really to see more about that challenge is click right on that line, and it will jump into the challenge view. So again, this is going to look very familiar to the challenge phase itself. So what you'll be able to see are three tabs across the top there: details, locations, and rebuttals. So that first details tab, that is going to show information about the original challenge. Again, that's the information that I was talking about earlier. You're going to see who submitted the challenge, when it was submitted, the challenge type. That challenge type description is just a generic kind of sentence about the challenge type. That is not anything unique that the permissible challenger who submitted the challenge wrote. You'll see the technology, the service availability, and then if there were any like drop down fields that were selected for the challenge, you will also see that. Again, you will not be able to see the actual evidence that was submitted with the challenge. On the next tab, you will also be able to see all of the locations that were accepted in that challenge. So if you see that status column where it says passed, that is going to mean that the passed initial review with the Indiana Broadband Office. And so then therefore that location is actually available to rebut. So then the last tab is that rebuttals tab. This is where you will actually start that rebuttal process. If you decide that you have rebuttal evidence for that particular challenge, you will just click that blue button and it will put you into the flow for rebuttal submission, which is quite straightforward. As you can see across the top, there are really only 3 stages to rebuttal submission. Again, a bit simpler than the challenge submission process. So first, you will select the locations to be included in the rebuttal. So you can absolutely select all of the locations that were included in the challenge, but you do not have to. You can scroll through and select the individual locations that are going to be included in your rebuttal evidence. There's also a search bar there, so you can search by address. Let's say this is a large challenge with 500 locations or something like that. You'll be able to search by both FCC location ID and address if you are trying to narrow down your selection for what is to be included in the rebuttal. In the next stage, this is where you will upload your rebuttal evidence and then also provide a description of the evidence you are submitting. So again, very similar. This is going to be just a click or drag file to that area. Your evidence is going to be different depending on the challenge type that you are actually rebutting, but this is all going to look very similar regardless. And then again, down below, provide a description, just a quick note about the type of evidence that you are submitting and any justification or additional information the Indiana Broadband Office should know about going into final determinations around that evidence. That is a free text field, so you can put in that any notes that we should know moving into final determinations. And then the third and final piece is just an attestation certifying that all of the information submitted is true to the best of your knowledge. And then you'll click that submit rebuttal button. And that is really the entire process for rebuttal submission. Definitely fewer steps. And so then once that is complete, you can come back to this dashboard and you will see now there are no more challenges open for rebuttal for this test account that is a permissible challenger. And then you can see that actually 2 separate rebuttals have been submitted, again, in this test environment for that particular challenge. So again, that is acceptable for those challenges that are open for all permissible challengers. Multiple rebuttals can be submitted and will be reviewed during the final determinations phase. So just like the challenge phase, the dashboard is really going to be your go-to place for all things rebuttals and to be able to see that breakdown of challenges received versus those challenges that are open for all permissible challengers for rebuttals. So again, just to recap the challenge process timing from here moving forward on May 2nd. So on Thursday, we will move into that rebuttal phase at 9 a.m. That means you can review all of those rebuttals and also start submitting that rebuttal evidence. That will go through June 1st at 11:59 p.m. So make sure you have that June date in your head. And then immediately after the rebuttal phase wraps up, we will move into those final determinations. Again, that will be for any location that received both a challenge and a rebuttal. They will go into that disputed state, and then those will be the locations that will be reviewed during final determinations. I want to end before we hop into questions with our resources. So as I mentioned, this webinar recording and the slides will be posted on the Indiana Broadband Office website. There will also be a written rebuttal phase guide on the IBO website as well. It's going to cover much of the same information, have these screenshots to walk through. You can always email the Indiana Broadband Office with any questions. We are not planning to do office hours for the rebuttal phase as of right now. Instead, we would be happy to meet one-on-one, virtual meetings or phone calls about the rebuttal phase with any permissible challenger that has questions. Reach out to the IBO email address and we'd be happy to facilitate that as well. And I think with that, I will pause. I do see that there are some messages in the chat. So I will see if there are any questions.
I can help. The first question that we have is, what if there is an availability challenge for an enforceable commitment? Example for like next level connections, round 3.
Yep. So okay, another thing that I would like to explain, I think related to the challenges that were received. So let's say we received a challenge against a location that we know has an enforceable commitment. Ultimately, that challenge is not going to change whether or not that location is eligible for BEAD funding. So you would not need to rebut that challenge. There are also, we received several challenges, let's say availability challenges where we already knew that that location was unserved or underserved. Again, that challenge may have been accepted because the minimum level of evidence is there. But again, it's not going to actually change whether or not that location is eligible for the BEAD funding. Similarly, we received some planned or existing service challenges, again, on addresses that were already served. So while we may have accepted that challenge, doing so did not actually change the outcome, and therefore a rebuttal likely is not needed in those instances. I will say as well that after the final determination phase, while the process is done from that kind of challenge process standpoint, we will still do another round of deduplication of enforceable commitments. So we will make sure that we have really gotten all of those next level connections addresses. We know that the next round of next level connections will be awarded before we're done with the challenge process as a whole. So we will do another round of deduplication, make sure that we have 100% gotten all of those enforceable commitments appropriately, and then we will ultimately submit to NTIA.
I have another question. It reads, how can we have any confidence that there is accountability in this process when we cannot also review the evidence for challenges that have been submitted to our availability?
So all challenges were reviewed with the same evidence criteria as outlined in Volume 1 of the approved initial proposal. If you have any particular questions about challenges against your particular service, we would be happy to meet with you. Perhaps we can talk through those. However, know that transparency and consistency around those guidelines is the forefront of this process. Again, I would refer you to Volume 1 to see those examples and what someone has to prove, particularly in a challenge. But that was applied consistently across all of the review for the challenge phase.
Those are all the written questions I have right now for you, Megan.
If there are any other questions, you can feel free to put those in the chat and we will get to those. All right, I see a written question in the chat that is, what is timeline post-determination? That is a great question. So as I mentioned, there is some work that we have to do on the final, decisions and lists that come out of final determinations. First, we need to do that deduplication again of those enforceable commitments, anything new that has come out since we started the challenge process. I will also tell you that the NTIA has just recently released guidance to us about potential ways to treat the new broadband data collection that is coming out. So we are still digesting that, but just know that after the final determinations phase, there will be some additional work to be done on that list. We have to get it in the right format to send to NTIA, which we will try to do as quickly as possible with that deduplication process. And then we will send it to NTIA for approval. Based on our current conversations with other states that are a little ahead of us in this process, we genuinely do not have a good timeline on how long it will take NTIA to turn around the results from our challenge process. They actually have to approve those before that can become our final list of addresses that are eligible for the funding and therefore subgrantee selection. So I know this is a bit of a non-answer in terms of the timeline. What I can tell you is that the Indiana Broadband Office will turn around the pieces that we can as quickly as possible, within, weeks after the final determinations are made. In terms of NTIA actually coming back to us, that's a little bit more of a question mark, and we will certainly keep, permissible challengers and all of our stakeholders posted on when we actually get that approval or any comments from NTIA.
Thanks, Megan. I have a couple more for you. First, are all challenges against the provider available for viewing in the portal as of now?
If you have received challenge against your particular service, you should be able to see those in the portal already, but you will not be able to see all of the other available challenges. So that would be those planned or existing service, location as a CII. I will also tell you, I know we're down a little bit to the last minute. You guys did such a great job at submitting so many challenges. We are still reviewing some, so we don't have very many left on our list to review. But just know, even if you're seeing some challenges now, you may still see a few more pop up before the start of the rebuttal phase, just because we are still finishing and finalizing all of those reviews. But you should be able to see any challenges against your service that have been approved through that evidence review process as of now already in the Ready portal. And if you do not, potentially you do not have any challenges against your service of that type, or if you think that that is not the case, please let us know and we will double check with Ready and make sure that there is not a bug in the system for your particular account.
There was sort of a secondary question in that vein, but just for completion's sake, the next question is, would we be seeing these challenges on the Ready website now, or will it be after 5.1? So I think we touched that, but just wanted to let you know.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions that we can help answer today? All right. If that is the case, let's see. Okay, I see another question. This may be part of volume 2, but when do you plan on publishing the application process? So if you look at the volume 2 that is online at the Indiana Broadband Office, there are lots of details about the types of things that will be required during that subgrantee selection application process, including kind of the pre-requirements, pre-qualification requirements, and then what will be part of scoring and the submission process throughout each of those rounds. I will say that Indiana's volume 2 is still in the curing phase. So we have not yet received approval from the NTIA. So what is on the website right now is a draft. So absolutely look at that. However, we are still receiving those curing comments. So that draft could change, though not drastically, before we get to our final version.
I have a couple more for you. First,
Perfect.
For evidence, does each individual location need to be listed visibly, or does visual mapping work?
If you are going to submit a map for evidence, we do have to be able to have enough detail to tie every single location that you are rebutting to that map. So that may not mean that you need to have, let's say, a dot for every location, though that is really helpful if you can do that. Anything that makes it abundantly clear to us, the clearer you make your evidence, the easier it is for us to go through that and really use it effectively. However, let's say you have a detailed enough map where you are showing your coverage area and it's very clear, by the boundaries or details that you put in that map, like the roads or anything else, that all locations in a specific area would be served in your service area, then that may be sufficient. But again, the more details that you can give, particularly in maps, the better for our review. It just makes it a little bit easier. Good question.
Another, is there a date in the future where the process is complete and all BEAD recipients notified?
So certainly that day will be coming sometime in the future. So after the challenge process is complete and our final list of eligible addresses has actually been approved by NTIA, that is when we will move into our subgrantee selection process. Again, more details of that are available in our volume 2, but essentially we will have, we are thinking right now 3 rounds of subgrantee selection. We will try to get those started, as soon as we feasibly can after getting approval on our address list from NTIA. Again, we are expecting likely sometime in the fall. Again, that is very malleable depending on when NTIA gets back to us with various approvals. We expect that subgrantee selection process will go through early 2025 is our best guess right now on timeline. And then at the end of the subgrantee selection rounds, we will be submitting a final proposal to NTIA, and that will include all of the awards that have been given for each of the locations on our address list. So I do not have a firm date for you. Again, much of that is dependent on NTIA approvals within the process, but you can expect likely sometime maybe Q2 of 2025 of having all of that solidified and in the hands of NTIA. Good question. All right, any others?
Those are all the written questions.
All right, in which case I will just say thank you all for hopping on the webinar. Again, we will make sure that those resources get posted to the website, including this recording. I will stay on for a couple of minutes if people have additional questions that they want to put in chat or ask verbally. But otherwise, thank you all so much for your participation in the challenge process. We are so pleased with really the participation that we had across the board in the challenge phase, and we're really excited for that to continue with rebuttals. Thank you all so much.